What started as routine training camp practice turned into the most explosive confrontation in Dallas Cowboys history. Two superstars, one heated exchange, and a franchise that might never recover from what happened next. The temperature was already rising in Dallas, but it wasn't just the Texas heat causing problems at Cowboys training camp. Micah Parsons, the defensive powerhouse who'd become the face of America's team, was about to detonate a bomb that would shake the entire organization to its core. This wasn't your typical contract dispute or locker room disagreement. This was a full-scale war between two of the NFL's biggest personalities. And what went down would leave fans, teammates, and even Jerry Jones himself scrambling to pick up the pieces. But what happens when your stars turn against each other before a single game is played? The warning signs had been building for weeks. Parsons wasn't just frustrated about his contract situation, he was absolutely furious. While other players were grinding through 2-a-day practices, pushing their bodies to the limit in preparation for what many believed could be a championship season, Parsons was operating in a completely different headspace. His agent had been locked in tense negotiations with Cowboys management, and every passing day without a resolution was adding fuel to an already dangerous fire. Behind the scenes, whispers were getting louder. Veterans were starting to notice Parsons' body language during meetings. His energy during drills seemed off. The infectious enthusiasm that had made him a fan favorite was slowly being replaced by something much darker. And while Jerry Jones continued his usual media circus, downplaying concerns and throwing around his trademark overconfident predictions, the tension in the building was becoming impossible to ignore. Last season, Parsons recorded 14 sacks and 33 quarterback hits, ranking top 5 among NFL defenders. When a player with that level of impact starts disengaging, every teammate feels the void instantly. The practice that changed everything started like any other. Players were loosening up, running through basic formations, and getting ready for more intense drills. But Dak Prescott, who'd been watching his defensive superstar's attitude for days, was reaching his breaking point. Here was a quarterback who'd faced years of criticism, playoff disappointments, and constant questions about his ability to lead the team to a championship. Every rep mattered to him. Every moment of preparation was sacred. So when he saw Parsons standing on the sideline with his arms crossed, clearly disengaged from what was happening around him, something inside Dak snapped. The confrontation didn't build slowly. It exploded like a grenade going off in the middle of the field. After completing a routine pass to CeeDee Lamb, Dak jogged past Parsons and muttered something that would change their relationship forever. The exact words were barely audible to most players, but Parsons heard every syllable, and his reaction was immediate and volcanic. Think about this. What happens when your quarterback challenges the face of your defense right in front of the entire team? What happened next turned a private disagreement into a public spectacle that had teammates, coaches, and eventually the entire NFL talking. Parsons didn't just respond to Dak's comment, he launched into a verbal assault that cut straight to the quarterback's deepest insecurities. This wasn't just about contracts or practice participation anymore. This was personal. This was about leadership, respect, and years of frustration finally boiling over in the most dramatic way possible. The words flying between them were brutal. Parsons questioned Dak's playoff performances, his ability to deliver in clutch moments, and whether he deserved to be considered a true leader. Dak fired back with accusations about Parsons being selfish, putting money over team success, and abandoning his teammates when they needed him most. Every sentence was designed to inflict maximum damage, and both players were landing devastating blows. Players who witnessed the exchange described it as unlike anything they'd ever seen in professional sports. Veterans who'd been through multiple training camps, survived coaching changes, and dealt with every type of drama imaginable were stunned by the intensity and personal nature of what was unfolding. CeeDee Lamb was seen shaking his head in disbelief. Zach Martin, who'd dealt with his own contract disputes over the years, knew immediately that this was going to have consequences far beyond a single practice session. The aftermath was immediate and chaotic. Coaches rushed in to separate the two players before the situation could escalate into something physical. Parsons stormed off the field, his helmet swinging violently as he headed towards the locker room. Dak remained on the field longer, throwing passes with an intensity that bordered on aggressive, but his focus was clearly shattered. The practice essentially ended right there. with players standing around in awkward silence, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. By the time the dust settled, the Cowboys organization was facing a crisis that threatened to undermine their entire season before it even began. The media was already circling, desperate for details about what had actually been said during the confrontation. Reporters were calling sources, trying to confirm rumors, and speculating about the long-term implications for both players and the team as a whole. The locker room split almost immediately, along predictable lines. Veteran players, many of whom had their own complex relationships with contract negotiations and team management, found themselves choosing sides. Some defended Dak's position, arguing that team chemistry and preparation had to come before individual financial concerns. Others rallied behind Parsons, pointing out that he'd been carrying the defense for years, while management dragged their feet on giving him the contract extension he clearly deserved. The Cowboys' defense ranked top 3 in pressures and takeaways last year, largely because of Parsons' relentless pursuit. Teammates knew losing him, mentally or physically, could derail the entire season. The divide wasn't just about the specific argument between Dak and Parsons. It exposed deeper issues within the Cowboys organization that had been simmering for months. Questions about Jerry Jones's management style, the team's approach to contract negotiations, and whether the current leadership structure was capable of handling superstar personalities were suddenly front and center. Jordan Schultz, the NFL insider who'd been tracking Parsons' growing frustration, didn't waste time connecting the dots. His social media posts following the incident painted a picture of an organization in crisis, with 2 cornerstone players whose relationship might be permanently damaged. The implications were staggering. How could a team expect to compete for a championship when its most important players couldn't even coexist during practice? The trade rumors that had been whispered about for weeks suddenly became front-page news. The Green Bay Packers, who'd been quietly monitoring the situation in Dallas, saw an opportunity to land one of the NFL's most dominant defensive players. Reports surfaced about potential packages involving Rashan Gary and multiple draft picks, deals that would give Dallas something significant in return, while allowing Parsons to escape what had clearly become an unsustainable situation. Can you imagine Micah Parsons, in green and gold, terrorizing quarterbacks for the Packers? For Packers fans, the possibility was intoxicating. Imagine Parsons playing alongside their existing defensive core, bringing his pass-rushing abilities and leadership to a team that had been looking for exactly that type of impact player. For Cowboys fans, the thought of losing Parsons was devastating, especially knowing that the situation might have been avoided with better communication and more proactive contract negotiations. Jerry Jones's response to the crisis was vintage Jerry Jones, a mixture of downplaying the severity of the situation while simultaneously trying to control the narrative through media appearances and carefully crafted statements. His trademark smirk was on full display as he brushed off reporters' questions, insisting that competitive players sometimes clash and that everything would work itself out. But insiders weren't buying the public relations spin. Behind closed doors, Jones was reportedly furious about how the situation had spiraled out of control. This was supposed to be the year that everything came together for the Cowboys. The roster was loaded with talent, expectations were through the roof, and the organization had positioned itself for what many believed could be a legitimate Super Bowl run. Instead, they were dealing with a public relations nightmare that threatened to overshadow everything else. With Dallas projected as a top 5 Super Bowl contender in preseason rankings, this internal chaos couldn't have come at a worse time. The owner's handling of contract negotiations had been criticized for years, but this situation highlighted every weakness in his approach. Parsons wasn't just any player demanding more money. He was a generational talent who'd proven his worth on the field, time and time again. The fact that negotiations had reached this point, where the player felt so disrespected that he was willing to have a public confrontation with his quarterback, reflected poorly on the entire organization's ability to manage its most valuable assets. The ripple effects of the confrontation extended far beyond the Cowboys' training facility. Other NFL teams were watching the situation closely, both as potential trade partners and as cautionary tales for how not to handle superstar players. Agents representing other high-profile clients were taking notes about how quickly situations could deteriorate when communication broke down and egos got involved. The incident also raised broader questions about leadership in professional sports. Both Dak and Parsons were considered leaders within the organization, But their public clash demonstrated how quickly leadership could become destructive when personal frustrations overrode team concerns. Veterans who'd been through similar situations in other organizations were privately questioning whether the Cowboys had the mature leadership structure necessary to navigate complex personality conflicts. Media analysts were having a field day dissecting every aspect of the confrontation. Television shows dedicated entire segments to breaking down the psychology behind the clash, the potential trade scenarios, and what it all meant for the Cowboys' championship aspirations. Social media was exploding with takes from former players, current analysts, and fans who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The timing couldn't have been worse for Dallas. Training camp was supposed to be about building chemistry, establishing rhythm, and preparing for what everyone hoped would be a special season. Instead, the organization was dealing with daily questions about whether their two biggest stars could coexist, whether trades were imminent, and whether the entire season was already in jeopardy before the first regular season game had even been played. As days passed without resolution, the pressure continued mounting from all directions. Season ticket holders were expressing concerns about the team's stability. Sponsors were quietly monitoring the situation to see how it might impact their marketing partnerships. And most importantly, players throughout the roster were trying to figure out how to prepare for the season, while their two leaders were engaged in what appeared to be an irreparable conflict. The psychological impact on the rest of the team was perhaps the most concerning aspect of the entire situation. Young players who looked up to both Dak and Parsons were confused about how to respond. Should they choose sides? Should they try to mediate? Should they just focus on their own preparation and hope the situation resolved itself? The uncertainty was affecting everyone's ability to concentrate on football. And here's the real question. Can a team still chase a championship when its leaders are at war with each other? What made the situation even more volatile was the realization that both players had legitimate grievances. Parsons wasn't wrong to feel frustrated about his contract situation. He'd outperformed his rookie deal by massive margins and deserved to be compensated accordingly. Dak wasn't wrong to expect full commitment from his teammates during crucial preparation time. The tragedy was that two reasonable positions had collided in the most destructive way possible. The Cowboys found themselves facing a scenario that could define their franchise for years to come. If they traded Parsons, they'd be losing one of the most dynamic defensive players in the NFL during what was supposed to be their championship window. If they kept him while the relationship with Dak remained fractured, they risked ongoing locker room tension that could poison the entire season. Some former NFL executives who dealt with similar situations were privately suggesting that the Cowboys had waited too long to address the underlying issues. Contract negotiations that dragged on for months, communication breakdowns between management and players, and a failure to recognize how personal frustrations were affecting team dynamics had all contributed to creating the perfect storm. The national media coverage was relentless, with every major sports outlet running daily updates about potential developments in the situation. ESPN was bringing in former players and executives to analyze every angle. Sports talk radio was dominated by discussions about what the Cowboys should do next. Social media was flooded with trade proposals, taking sides, and speculation about how the drama would ultimately resolve. For Jerry Jones, this represented one of the most significant challenges of his ownership tenure. He'd successfully managed previous contract disputes and personality conflicts, but never with stakes this high and public scrutiny this intense. His next moves would likely determine whether the Cowboys could salvage their season, or whether this incident would be remembered as the moment everything fell apart. The players themselves seemed to understand the magnitude of what had happened. Both Dak and Parsons had been notably absent from their usual social media activity following the confrontation. Teammates were being careful about what they said to reporters, clearly aware that any comments could be interpreted as taking sides in the dispute. As the situation continued to unfold, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just a training camp scuffle that would blow over in a few days. This was a defining moment for the Dallas Cowboys organization, a test of their ability to manage crisis, maintain team unity, and keep their championship aspirations alive despite internal chaos that threatened to tear everything apart. The entire NFL was watching to see how one of the league's most high-profile franchises would handle the biggest internal crisis they'd faced in years.